I'm Eleanor Pierce, 76 years old, and I'd just finished setting the dining table when the message came through. I thought it might be Garrett asking if I needed a ride, or reminding me about the parking near their new house. Instead, it said the dinner was canceled and a second message followed, seconds later. You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there. The room felt suddenly too quiet. The roast chicken in the oven smelled like home, but the warmth drained from it all. The house was full of framed photographs of their milestones and mine. But in that moment, every single one felt like a borrowed memory. By the time I sat down to steady my hands, I already knew something had ended before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to choose peace over pleasing someone. I was born and raised in Ashford, Missouri, raised in a house where hard work and courtesy meant everything. My daddy was a machinist. My mother ran the house like a clock. And I grew up believing that helping your family was what made a person good after James and I married. We never had much, but we always made room at our table. We taught Garrett the same values too, or so. I thought James passed 15 years ago this fall, and ever since I've done my best to keep the family close. I helped Garrett and his wife Laura with their first home loan, watched the grandkids when needed paid, for braces, tutors, even the down payment on the new house near the river, the one with the big windows and the guest suite on the main floor. Perfect for you, Mom, Garrett said. At the time, I didn't question it. When they asked for help, it felt like the right thing to do. The phone buzzed again while I was still reading the first message. Same number, same name. But the tone was something I didn't recognize. I sat there, holding the phone like it might explain itself. Memories of Garrett at 4 years old came back to me, clutching my skirt on his first day of school, crying, because he thought I'd leave without saying goodbye. I never imagined he'd grow into a man who'd leave me out on purpose. I looked around the living room, and all I saw were signs of what I'd given to make their life easier. The mortgage, the remodeled kitchen, the private school, tuition for our grandson Toby, a glossy brochure for Riverbend Estates, sat on the coffee table, the place I helped them move into just 6 months earlier. I thought about how James always said to watch the line between helping and being used. Eleanor, he'd say, kindness is a gift, not a currency. I stood up, slowly, walked over to the secretary desk, and opened the drawer where I kept all the receipts, checks, account ledgers, a lifetime of quiet giving labeled neatly in manila folders. The folder marked, Garrett was the thickest somewhere between car insurance payments and student loans. I started to see the pattern, not just generosity, but silence. Every check came with a thank you and a new expectation. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just tired. The message from our granddaughter Lily came in next. Simple and sweet. Grandma, are you coming over tonight? I saved you a seat. I stared at her text for a long while, then typed back. Looks like your parents have decided it's best if I stay home. Her reply came almost immediately. What Dad said, you absolutely had to be here, so she didn't know. I looked at the file again, at every line that added up to me, losing my voice in this family. Then I called the bank. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain more than necessary. I simply asked them to stop every automatic payment tied to my accounts and to suspend the power of attorney. Garrett had been using the woman on the line, hesitated when she saw the volume. You have 174 payments scheduled across accounts, Mrs. Pierce. Do you want to suspend all of them? Yes, I said, every one. By the time I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not regret, not fear. I felt still. I made myself a cup of tea and opened the book James once gave me for our anniversary. The one I kept meaning to read when the doorbell rang an hour later. I didn't answer it. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning, even though I hadn't planned on doing anything in particular. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you hear the small things, the creak of the floorboard by the window, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the light stretch slowly across the floor. The phone had stayed off overnight, and I wasn't in any hurry to turn it back on. It was around 9 when I finally checked my messages. 3 missed calls from Garrett, 2 from Marissa, 1 from Toby. There was also a short message from Lily Grandma, "Our house is in chaos. My parents are fighting. Toby's in a panic. Are you okay? Can I come by tomorrow?" I sent back a simple reply. "Yes, dear. I'd love to see you. I'm perfectly fine." What I didn't expect was for Marissa to show up first. She rang the bell around 10, holding a white box from a pastry shop in one hand and that polished smile of hers in the other. Her hair was neatly pinned lipstick, carefully applied blouse, crisp, and buttoned to the collar. She stood there like she was arriving for a professional meeting, not an apology. I opened the door without saying anything. She walked in like she owned the place. "I thought we could talk," she said, setting the box down on the kitchen counter like it was a peace offering. "There's been a misunderstanding." I didn't offer her coffee. I didn't pull out chairs. I just walked into the living room and sat down. She followed. "Garrett shouldn't have sent that message," she said, clasping her hands in her lap. It was emotional. We were both under pressure. Hosting that dinner took more out of me than I expected. She glanced around the room the same way she always did, scanning every object like it might be out of place. "I think we both said things we didn't mean," she continued. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "You did." She blinked. "Well, that message wasn't meant to hurt you." "But it did," I said. "And it came from Garrett's phone. His number. His name." Marissa adjusted the collar of her blouse. It was a mistake. The whole evening was just stressful. We had potential clients at the dinner, people who could help my business. I needed everything to be just right, and I would have made things wrong, I said. She didn't answer right away. "I just meant that sometimes," she said, "you don't always understand how these things work. Your presence can be a little unpredictable." That's when I knew she wasn't here to apologize. She was here to pivot to make the issue about perception and image and my role in it. I sat quietly for a moment, letting her fill the silence. "You've always been important to us," she added. "But right now, Garrett's overwhelmed, and I'm trying to hold everything together. And now, on top of all that, the mortgage didn't go through. Toby's card is frozen." Our insurance bounced. "We're not just talking about feelings here, Edith. These are real consequences." I looked at her carefully. "You want me to start the payments again?" "I'm asking you to be reasonable." "I've been reasonable," I said. "For 25 years. Her smile faltered just a flicker. "This isn't fair. After everything we've done for you." "What have you done for me?" "Marissa?" I asked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "We included you in our family," she said finally. I didn't say anything, just looked at her until she turned her face slightly toward the window. "You'll regret this," she said, standing. "When you're alone and need help, remember this moment." I followed her to the door and opened it. "Don't come back until you can speak with respect," I said. She stepped onto the porch without another word. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down with a fresh notebook and made a list. It wasn't a grocery list or a reminder for other people's errands. It was mine. Places I wanted to go. Things I wanted to learn. A new dress I'd seen in the catalog. The travel show I kept meaning to watch. A watercolor class at the community center. Italy, maybe. James had always wanted us to go. Later that week, I called Laureen. She was putting together a small trip to the mountains in June, and I asked if I could join. She said yes, without hesitation, and for the first time in a long while, I had something to look forward to that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. Then the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Toby. He looked tired, hair uncombed, shirt wrinkled. His usual self-assurance was gone. "Can I come in?" "Grandma?" I stepped aside and let him through. He sat on the edge of the couch, clasping his hands. "I need help," he said. "My account's frozen. My rent's past due. I've got payments I can't make." He listed them one by one. Rent, car, phone. He mentioned a trip he'd taken a new phone a few weekends with friends. He looked up, eyes wide and hopeful. "I'll pay you back," he said. "I promise." I asked him how much he owed. He said $7,000. I asked how he planned to repay it. He didn't know. "You're 23, Toby," I said. "You've had a job for 2 years. Why haven't you learned how to manage money?" He stared down at his hands. "Because I always thought if things got bad, you'd help." "I have helped," I said, "over and over." He nodded slowly. "I won't be giving you money," I told him. His head snapped up. "What?" "You need to start solving problems on your own," I said. "That's part of growing up." He slumped back into the couch. "So you're just leaving me?" "No," I said. "I'm giving you a chance." I told him about Francis Whitaker, the family attorney. He needed help at the office clerical work, answering phones. "You're offering me a job?" he asked. "I'm offering you a step," I said. He sat quietly for a while, then nodded. "Okay, I'll try." After he left, I stood in the hallway for a long moment. The house was still. My hands were steady. I turned the phone over in my palm once, then set it face down on the counter. The next visit would be Lily, and I had a feeling that conversation would be different from all the others. Something was changing. Not just in them, but in me. It was nearly dinner time when Lily came by. She carried a paper bag with a few grocery soup crackers, a small container of fruit. I opened the door and stepped aside, and she walked in like she had a purpose, not a question. Her coat was half-zipped, and her cheeks were pink from the wind. She headed straight to the kitchen, setting the bag down on the counter before turning to look at me. "I figured you hadn't been eating much," she said. "I made a casserole last night," I told her. She gave a small smile. "Good, then I'll have some." We sat across from each other at the table. The kitchen felt warm, even though I hadn't turned on the heat that day. Lily spooned soup into 2 bowls, then passed one across to me. "They're still arguing," she said quietly. "Dad and Mom. She keeps saying it's his fault. He says she's the one who ruined everything. Neither of them wants to admit what they did to you." I stirred my soup without answering. The spoon clinked lightly against the side of the bowl. "Toby's panicking," she continued. "He keeps checking his credit score like it's going to fix something. He told me you offered him a job with Mr. Whitaker." "I did." She nodded. "He won't say it, but I think he's relieved. It's the first real thing he's done in months." I took a sip of soup, then reached for a napkin. "How are you holding up?" Lily gave a quiet shrug. "It's tense. I try to stay out of it, but I'm not surprised. They've been like this for years, papering over problems with money, blaming each other when it runs out." She looked at me, then her expression steady. "I don't know how you managed all this for so long." I didn't have an answer to that. After dinner, we cleared the dishes together. She washed, I dried. It was the first time in a while that the house didn't feel too quiet. We talked about her job at the library, a book she was reading, the community college course she'd been thinking of taking. It wasn't a heavy conversation. No tension. No guilt. Just 2 people sharing space. When she got ready to leave, she hugged me tightly. "I just want you to know," she said, "I think you're doing the right thing. You've taken care of everyone for years. Maybe it's time someone looked out for you." "Thank you," I said. She stepped outside and pulled her coat tighter. "I'll check on you later this week." I nodded and watched her walk toward her car. The porch light caught a few strands of her hair, turning them gold for a moment, before she slipped into the driver's seat. The next day, I kept the phone off for most of the morning. I finished the laundry, cleaned out the pantry, sorted through the mail. In the stack was a notice from Toby's credit card company, a failed auto payment warning. The envelope was addressed to him, but had come to my house probably from an old shared account. I set it aside. By late afternoon, the phone started buzzing again. Voicemails, missed calls, one message from Garrett. "We need to talk. I'm coming over." I turned off the stove and set a kettle on the burner. I didn't know what kind of conversation he had in mind, but I wasn't going to meet him halfway. He showed up around 5. No Marissa this time. His car pulled into the driveway, and I watched from the kitchen window as he sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before getting out. His shoulders looked hunched, his pace slow. When I opened the door, he didn't say anything right away. Just gave a tight nod and stepped inside. I led him to the kitchen, where the kettle was just starting to steam. "Tea?" I asked. He didn't answer, just sat down at the table. "You've shut everything off," he said finally. "All the payments, the mortgage, the insurance, Toby's tuition." I placed 2 cups on the table and poured the water. "Yes." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You didn't even warn me. I didn't think a warning was necessary." "I know that message was wrong," he said. "I shouldn't have let her send it." Marissa was upset. The dinner was important. I passed him the cup. So was my place in the family. He didn't pick up the tea, just stared at the table. "We've got bills coming due this week. The bank called about the house." Marissa's beside herself. I stirred a spoonful of honey into my cup. "You're both adults. I assume you'll figure something out." Garrett looked up, and for a moment he reminded me of his younger self, anxious, unsure, trying to read my face for what I really meant. "Mom," he said, "we can't do this without you. You'll have to. But what about everything you've always done for us? You raised me to believe family helps each other." I set down my spoon. "I did help you," I said, "for years. I helped you with your home, your children, your life. But you stopped treating me like family. I became a transaction." Garrett shook his head. "That's not fair. What's not fair is being excluded from a dinner in a house I helped pay for." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down at his hands. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "You just have to understand this isn't going back to the way it was." He stood slowly. "So what now?" "You take care of your home," I said. "You pay your bills. You learn to live within your means." Garrett walked to the door but paused with his hand on the knob. "Marissa wants to come by," he said. "Talk it out. Can we come this weekend?" "You can," I said. "But the money conversation is over." He gave a short nod and left without another word. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the sound of his car pulling away. Then I walked to the desk, opened the notebook I'd started earlier that week, and wrote down one more thing under "to do this year: spend a week by the ocean." Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. Saturday came with clear skies and a soft breeze. I spent the morning watering the front yard and trimming the rosemary bush by the porch. The birds were especially active, and I paused more than once to watch them dart across the fence. Inside, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and set out a plate of shortbread cookies, not for anyone in particular, just a habit I hadn't shaken. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I dried my hands and went to answer it. Garrett stood there alone again. His shirt was tucked in this time, but his eyes looked tired. "Hi, Mom." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He glanced around the entryway before walking through to the living room. "The others are parking," he said. "Marissa wanted to speak to you first." I nodded once and walked with him to the kitchen. The cookies were untouched, the coffee still warm. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again, once, then twice, a little quicker. I opened the door, and there she was. Marissa stood on the porch in a navy coat, heels too high for the walkway, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In her hands, a gift bag with crisp tissue paper. Behind her were Lily and Toby, both quiet, and further still, parked cars lining the curb, more people than I expected. "Good afternoon, Edith," she said, her voice just a touch too loud. "We're here to talk things through. As a family?" I looked past her and saw at least 10 others milling outside her parents, her sister, someone who looked like a cousin. I met Marissa's eyes again. "I didn't invite all of these people. They're concerned," she replied, stepping inside without waiting. "This affects more than just you and me." Toby followed without a word. Lily lingered, eyes uncertain. The others stayed by their cars. Once inside, I closed the door firmly. We stood in the living room. Garrett stayed near the wall, arms folded. "I'd like to know why we're making a public event out of a private issue," I said. Marissa set the gift bag on the coffee table, her movements precise. "We felt it was necessary," she said. "This situation has affected more people than you realize. My parents are depending on us financially. Garrett's brother is between jobs. And with your support suddenly gone, everyone's stability is in jeopardy." I turned toward Garrett. "You've spoken to Neil." He looked up. "Not recently." I faced Marissa again. "I haven't heard Neil's name in 5 years." She waved a hand like she was brushing something aside. "That's not the point. The point is, your decision has had a ripple effect. Toby may lose his apartment. The house is behind on payments, and Garrett is under enormous pressure." She gestured toward Garrett like she was presenting evidence. Lily stayed off to the side, quiet. Toby stood with his hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact. I didn't raise my voice. "This isn't about a message or a payment. It's about years of behavior dismissals, decisions made without me being spoken about, but not spoken to. You excluded me from the dinner. You made it clear how little I mattered." "That was a mistake," Garrett said. "I've told you that." Marissa pressed her lips together. "It was one evening. We were trying to impress potential clients. And I would have ruined that," I asked. She didn't answer. I looked to Toby. "What about you?" He shifted his weight. "Grandma, I didn't think it was a big deal at first, but I didn't know you'd be hurt like that." "You didn't ask," I said. The room was still for a long moment. Marissa spoke next. "This isn't just about feelings, Edith. It's about survival. We need help. And I needed respect," I said. "Not out of obligation, just common decency." Garrett ran a hand through his hair. "So, what now? Are you cutting us off forever?" "I'm no longer paying to be ignored," I said. "That's not a punishment. It's a boundary." Toby looked up. "I'm working now. I'm trying. I know I said. That's all I've asked." "That you try." Marissa stepped forward. "You can't just walk away from your family. We've always included you. When it suited you," I said. "When there was something you needed." She took a deep breath. "You'll regret this." "I already have," I said quietly. "Many times over." Garrett turned toward the door, his hand on the knob. "Can we talk again?" "Just us, maybe," I said. "But not today." Lily approached before they left. She gave me a hug held longer than usual. I'm sorry, Grandma. I touched her shoulder. You have nothing to be sorry for. The others left without saying much. Outside, car doors slammed. Engines started. The noise faded down the street. I stood at the window for a while, then walked back to the table and poured the last of the coffee. The afternoon light was soft coming in through the curtains. I sat down and opened the notebook again. Added one more thing to the list. Be present for people who are present for me. Next time, they wouldn't be bringing reinforcements. Next time, I'd be ready for whatever they brought on their own. The following Monday, I drove across town to Whitaker Hardware. It was just after 9, and the air still held that cool, early spring sharpness. I parked in the employee lot and made my way around to the office entrance. The sign on the door read, Manager G. Whitaker Est, 1967. I knocked once before stepping in. Greg Whitaker stood behind the desk, sorting through invoices. He looked up and smiled. Morning, Edith. You're early. I brought those recommendation letters, I said, setting the folder on his desk. He reached for it and flipped through the pages. You weren't kidding. You've got this boy documented like a senator. Toby's got potential, I said. He just hasn't had someone put him in the right lane. Greg nodded slowly. Well, we've got a stockroom opening starting next week. It's part-time, but there's room to grow. No hand-holding, though. He shows up late, he's out. I understand. I'm willing to give it a try for your sake. Make it for his. Greg looked up again, then nodded. All right, then. Send him in Thursday morning, 8 sharp. I thanked him and left the office, feeling the sun warming up as I crossed the parking lot. On the way home, I stopped by the post office, then the pharmacy, to refill my prescription. I ran into Mrs. Callahan there. She asked about my garden, said her roses weren't blooming right this year. We talked for a bit near the vitamin aisle before I said goodbye and headed home. That afternoon, I called Toby. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Grandma. You still interested in working? There was a pause. Yes. I am. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. Whitaker Hardware. Don't be late. I gave him the address and told him to wear boots, nothing flashy. He sounded surprised, grateful, but cautious. I'll be there, he said. We hung up, and I went out back to tend the soil along the fence. The ground was soft from last week's rain, and I managed to turn the beds without much trouble. Later that evening, the phone rang again. This time, it was Lily. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Toby told me. He's nervous, but I think it's good for him. He needs something of his own, I said. Not a handout, a start. I've been thinking about that, she said. About what it means to start over. I'm applying for that community college program, the one we talked about. You should. It feels strange, she said. Doing something just for myself. I could hear her smile through the phone. Well, I said it's about time someone in this family did. Thursday came. Toby showed up at Whitaker's right on time in jeans and a plain jacket. Greg told me later he was quiet but listened well. Moved a dozen boxes before lunch and didn't complain once. By the end of the week, Greg had already mentioned training him on the registers. That same day, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was a law office in St. Louis. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a packet from the firm that had handled James's estate. Along with a note from our old attorney, there was a finalized statement of financial distributions accounts that had matured a trust that had quietly gathered interest. I'd forgotten half of it, but the totals were clear. More than I expected. Enough to live on. Enough to leave something behind. I made myself a cup of tea and sat with the numbers for a while. Then I pulled out my ledger and began writing a new list just for me this time. Things I'd never made time for. Places I'd thought I'd visit but always postponed. I even called the travel agent we used to work with and asked for brochures on small coastal towns along the East Coast. I didn't know where I'd go yet, but the idea of choosing just for myself felt like something I needed to practice. That weekend, Lily dropped by with a small box of lemon muffins and a library book she thought I might like. We sat out on the back porch, the garden behind us blooming slowly into color. She told me about the class schedule, the night courses, the job she'd keep to pay for it. I listened, nodded, and when she looked uncertain, I didn't offer to pay. I offered to help her budget. She laughed at that. "You always have a plan. You'll want one too," I said, "even if it changes." That night, after she'd gone, I sat down and updated my will. I didn't remove anyone. I simply adjusted the terms. No more open accounts. No more unchecked access. Clear instructions with provisions for grandchildren based on need and effort. And one separate letter, signed and dated, tucked in with the documents. Just a few pages. It explained that love was not a transaction, that presence mattered more than performance, and that the most generous thing a person can do for their family is sometimes to step back and let them figure things out themselves. I sealed the envelope and placed it in the fireproof box beside James's old briefcase. The house was quiet that night. Not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when the air finally clears. It was just after 5 on a Wednesday when I got the call. I'd been pulling weeds near the back fence, gloves still on, knees sore from crouching too long. The phone rang inside, muffled through the screen door. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the kitchen. The number wasn't one I recognized. Local area code. I answered anyway. "Hi, is this Edith Wembley?" a woman's voice asked, polite but distant. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Rachel Goodwin. I'm with Sunland Financial. I handle account oversight for a number of local clients, including your son, Garrett Wembley." I stayed quiet, waiting. "I'm calling because your name is still listed as a secondary on one of Garrett's business accounts, the one tied to a line of credit secured a few years back. There's been some movement on the account that requires your signature or your formal removal. We sent several notices to the primary email on file, but there's been no response. Since you're listed, we're obligated to notify you before the account enters collections." I leaned against the counter. "What exactly are we talking about?" "The account was established 5 years ago, using your joint collateral statement, specifically a home equity lien listed under your trust. I believe it was part of a startup venture, Gem North Holdings." I took a breath. "That lien was closed last year." "Yes, ma'am, we see that now. However, the default protections were never updated, which means your name is still attached." I asked her to send me everything, copies of the documents, activity reports, dates, signatures. She agreed and hung up. By that evening, I had the email in front of me. Garrett's name was on all the forms. So was mine, only not in handwriting I recognized. I pulled out my file box and cross-checked signatures. There it was on page 3 of the original loan guarantee, my name dated 2 years ago. I hadn't signed anything in that window. Not for him, not for anyone. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank where the original lien had been filed. The woman at the desk remembered me. I asked for a signature review and verification check. She brought in the branch manager. He looked through the documents, compared the signature on file. "This isn't a match," he said. "We can escalate this. I'd like that." They filed a formal statement and agreed to remove my trust as guarantor. It would take a few weeks to clear, but the lien would no longer hold. I asked them to send the final report in writing. I needed proof. That night, I sat with the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. The handwriting on the forged page wasn't Garrett's. Too clean, too practiced. It took me a minute, but I found it. An old thank you card from Marissa. It had come after Lily was born. Thank you for the crib, she'd written. Love, Marissa. I laid the card next to the forged signature. Same curl on the M, same slant. I didn't call Garrett. I didn't call her either. Instead, I made an appointment with the same lawyer who'd handled James's estate. Her name was Barbara, mid-40s. Direct. I brought the documents, the signature comparisons, the account statements. She flipped through each page, then looked up. "This is forgery. You could press charges." "I'm not looking to drag this through court," I said. "But I want it documented. If it happens again, I want the record ready." She nodded. "We'll file a formal affidavit, and we'll flag any accounts that show up under your trust from this point on. Thank you." "Edith," she said this was deliberate. Most people wouldn't catch it. I folded my hands. I was taught to read the fine print. By Friday, I had everything locked down. The trust was resecured. My name removed from Garrett's outstanding debts. And a protective clause added to prevent unauthorized financial activity moving forward. I spent the weekend quietly. I trimmed the hedge, made soup from scratch, watched an old film I hadn't seen in years. I answered no calls, returned no messages. Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Garrett standing there alone. He looked thinner than the last time, a little worn. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. He didn't sit, just stood near the counter, hands in his pockets. "I got a letter," he said, "from the bank, and from a lawyer." I waited. "You know I didn't know she did that," he said. "The signature. She told me you'd agreed, that it was all taken care of, and you never checked I trusted her." I nodded once. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have." "You should have called when you needed help, not borrowed against something that wasn't yours." He rubbed his face. "We were drowning. The business never took off, and I thought we'd make it back eventually. Marissa said it was temporary. She said you wouldn't even notice." She was wrong. He looked down. "I don't know how to fix this." "I already did," I said. "It's handled." He looked up. "So what now?" "That depends on you." He stood there for a while, then nodded. "If you ever want me to pay it back, I don't want a repayment," I said. "I want a clean line between what's yours and what isn't." He nodded again and left without asking for anything more. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap. The stars were bright, the air just cool enough for tea. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. The week after Garrett's visit passed quietly. I went about my routines, grocery shopping, on Tuesday laundry, on Thursday church service Sunday morning. But underneath all that, I was making preparations. Barbara, my lawyer, had helped me draw up the new documents. Everything was neat and clear. I made copies, tucked them into envelopes, and labeled each one by hand. One for the bank, one for my records, and one for the family meeting I'd decided to call. I didn't word it as a confrontation, just a polite message sent to Garrett, Marissa, and the 2 older grandchildren. "Sunday at 2, my place. I've made pie." No one replied. But at 2 o'clock on the dot, Garrett's car pulled into the driveway. Marissa stepped out in her usual heels and sunglasses. Lily and Toby trailed behind, both quieter than usual. I'd set up the dining table with coffee plates, napkins, folded just so. It looked like any other family Sunday, except I'd removed the framed photo that used to hang over the mantel, the one of all of us at Riverbend Estates. I didn't want it watching the room. Garrett walked in first, offered a faint smile. "Smells good in here." I nodded toward the chairs. "Sit, please." Marissa stayed standing, arms crossed, but she didn't speak. Lily sat at the far end and gave me a small smile. Toby didn't meet my eyes. I brought out the pie and placed a slice in front of each of them. Then I sat, took a deep breath, and laid the envelope in the center of the table. "This," I said, "is what I've done to protect myself." Garrett glanced at Marissa. She didn't touch the envelope. I've removed my name from all financial accounts you had access to, I said evenly. The trust has been restructured. Going forward, any use of my name or assets without consent will be considered fraud. Marissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't come here to accuse, I continued. I came to make things clear. Garrett finally reached for the envelope and slid the papers out. He scanned the top page, then the second, then set them down again. You didn't need to go this far. I did, I said, because the people I trusted didn't tell me the truth. No one spoke. The clock ticked on the wall behind us. Lily cleared her throat. Grandma, she said softly, did you really mean what you said in your message, that they told you not to come to dinner? I looked at her. Yes, honey, I did. She looked at her mother. Why would you do that? Marissa kept her eyes on the table. I thought it was better, she said finally. You were getting involved in things that weren't your place. I paid for half your house, I said, my voice calm. I signed for the foundation loan. I watched your children when you needed to travel. How is that not my place? Marissa didn't answer. Garrett reached across and put his hand on the table. We made a mistake, a big one. I know. He looked tired. I want to make things right. You can start? I said, by being honest with your children about what happened and why. He looked at them. Lily was watching him. Toby had tears in his eyes. We were selfish, Garrett said, his voice quiet. We took advantage, and we shut her out to hide it. Marissa didn't speak. Lily stood and came over to me. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders and whispered, I'm sorry. I love you. I held her tight for a moment. I love you too, sweetheart. They didn't stay long after that. Garrett gathered the papers, promised to return them signed, though I already had what I needed. Marissa didn't say goodbye. Lily did. So did Toby. Once the door closed behind them, I stood at the window and watched their car reverse down the drive. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that catches on the edge of everything. I cleaned the table, rinsed the dishes, and put the extra pie away. Then I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh page in the notebook where I'd been recording everything since that first text. At the top, I wrote, Today, they heard the truth. Then I closed the book. I didn't hear from Garrett or Marissa for several weeks after that meeting. The days were quiet, peaceful even. I tended to my garden, visited the library, stopped by the bakery on Main when I felt like a treat. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. Something had shifted. Something I hadn't expected to find this late in life. The feeling that I'd finally taken up space in my own story. The papers came back signed. Neatly mailed, no note inside. Just signatures and initials in all the right places. I filed them away, locked the drawer, and didn't mention it again. It was Lily who called first, just before Easter. She asked if she could come by and help dye eggs like we used to. I said yes. She showed up with a little basket of tulips and a soft sort of smile, like she didn't know what to expect from me anymore, but hoped for the best. We sat at the kitchen table, dipping the eggs into vinegar water and food coloring. She told me about college applications and a boy named Julian. I told her about a book I was reading and how the daffodils bloomed early that year. We didn't talk about the text message or the pie or the silence that followed. We just dyed eggs like before. That Sunday, Garrett brought over a spiral ham and a bag of rolls. No Marissa. He didn't say much, but he helped set the table and took out the trash before he left. Small gestures, but real ones. I took them for what they were. The truth is, not everything heals the way you think it will. Some things just stop hurting long enough for you to breathe again. And sometimes, dignity isn't about who apologizes first. It's about deciding where you won't let yourself be stepped over again. I didn't do all of this to punish anyone. I did it to draw a line gently but firmly and to stand behind it. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's erasure. And I'd spent too many years giving people permission to forget I was here. Now I wake up in the morning and choose peace. Some days, peace looks like fresh coffee and the sound of birds outside my window. Other days, it's declining a dinner I wasn't really invited to and not feeling guilty about it. Either way, it belongs to me. If you're still listening, thank you for walking through this with me. And if you've ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build, I hope you find the courage to take up space again. Leave a comment if any part of this felt familiar. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. It means we'll meet again next time.